so intro to meat goat nutrition. Go ahead and go to the next one, please. Overview. We're going to look at a ruminant's stomach. We're going to talk about nutrition or nutrients, sources of nutrients, nutrient requirements, and practical feeding. Now, I will tell you that this whole slide program is really kind of based on goat production. All right, so one thing you do have to understand, and I hope these kids completely understand this, that if you were actually going to go into the meat goat world and try to make money at raising meat goats, just as meat goats, not as show animals, all that, okay, the idea is to create meat with the least amount of input cost. Okay, when we're showing these things, that's not necessarily what we're doing. We're looking for maximum effect, and we're going to feed them the extra, and we're going to put the extra dollars and money into making them nicer. But if we really wanted to create a meat goat, we wouldn't feed them the way we go broke, is what would happen. You end up bankrupt because you can't feed them like we feed them to show and make any kind of profit out of it at all. Okay, so I hope you kids completely understand that. And this is coming from a standpoint of meat production, not necessarily show, but I'm going to try to supplement it a little bit to help. Go ahead and go to the next one. So here's a ruminant's stomach. They have 4 stomachs, okay? There's 4 compartments. Feel free to pronounce those however you would like. You have microbial digestion, absorption of some of the bacteria, feed breakdown through rumen wall, so it'll actually absorb some of it. There's a large particle trap where water absorption happens like right up here. Okay, acid digestion, so where it uses acid to actually break down is another compartment of the stomach, and enzymatic digestion in the small intestine. So we have 4 different stomachs that can absorb nutrients in 4 different ways. That's why when we make massive feed changes to these things, it causes so much of a problem, because whatever they eat, they're basically dividing into different parts of the stomach, and we massively change the feed, so we're massively changing the amount of feed that's going to one part of the stomach or the other. That's why we need to make small incremental changes. Go to the next one. Ruminant advantages. Digestive of fiber, dietary fiber by bacteria. Bacteria synthesize all B and K vitamins needed. Also synthesizes protein from nitrogen recycled in the body, detoxify anti-nutritional factors, tannins. It's an interesting thing. If you've ever had goats for very long, and you go through the fall and you have trees around and all the dead leaves fall in the pen, that is the only place you will not have to rake, because a goat will eat every leaf it can find. It actually likes them. That's why these goats do so well, even ran with cattle, because they don't like to eat particularly grass. They like all the roughage that cattle won't eat. So you can graze the 2 together at the same time, and they're not competing for food. That's what makes goats, a viable project. See, newborns, first 3 compartments are not developed. So when they're first born, they really only have one part of their stomach, and that develops over time. So during weaning time, it's important how you transition them into eating their own feed. Let's see, unique to goats, better ability to detoxify and absorb anti-nutritional factors, which means they can eat stuff that everybody else doesn't eat. I was really, really mad when I got the first goat. Well, Evan got his, and I thought, boy, that lot out back that I keep having to mow, I won't ever have to mow that again. I was wrong, because all the grass grew just fine, and the dumb thing wouldn't eat it. So it was just very, very frustrating. Go on to the next slide. Nutrients for goats. We have to have water. We need to have roughage and fiber. It is important that we're not just straight grain all the time. These animals, they thrive on the fact that they have roughage in their system. It makes their whole digestive system work better. You have energy and protein, minerals, and vitamins. Water is most important. They're really talking about water intake here for if you have lactating goats and all of that. And I know that's not necessarily something you guys are particularly into, but it is massively important that they get clean drinking water every day, because you're basically taking feed and you turn that feed into protein. And if we don't have water, we can't convert feed into protein. It's not going to happen. So we're just gonna eat feed and we're not gonna turn it into anything. And then your question is gonna be, well, I feed this thing like crazy, it eats, why is it gaining any weight? Well, if it's not drinking any water, it can't do that. So kids, it is very, very important that you keep the water buckets clean, that you keep them full. I mean, if it's dirty, I mean, you heard me last time, if you won't drink it, neither will they. So, go to the next one. Roughage should be primary source of feed intake. Maintains healthy rumen. Less problems when goats are forage fed. Minimum amount of half a pound of roughage per 100 pounds of body weight. I'm going to tell you right now that in terms of production, that's 100% right. In terms of showing breeding stock does, that's really 100% right, because they can be gutty and broody and all of those things. We like that in breeding stock. If you're going to play in the market game, they don't like that so much. They want them to be in meaty and look like a racehorse. If you're going to try to keep them that way, you're not going to be able to feed them a half a pound of hay a day. To do that, you're going to need to replace that half a pound of hay with more grain to try to create more muscle. But that doesn't mean that they don't need to get some hay every day. Ours, we will typically give a handful of hay once a day just to keep their guts right, okay? But we don't put them on full hay. If you do, you're gonna have, what's gonna end up happening is you're not gonna get the muscle production, and your animal's gonna look more like a marathon runner than a bodybuilder. That's exactly what'll happen. It doesn't necessarily mean that's a bad thing if we're trying to make meat, because that's a cheap way of meat production, but we're showing these animals, and it's different. Go ahead. Energy needed in the most amount, usually the most limiting nutrient. Excess is stored as fat, expressed as, you can go over that. And then other types of energy are carbohydrates and fats and protein. Biggest thing I'm going to tell you right now, you have in breeding stock, you can get them really fat and normally be just fine. I mean, there is obese, and you don't want to go obese, but you can get them very, very hefty. Market animals, most people don't get market animals fat enough. Okay, they're really thinking protein. Well, here's something I'm going to tell you. One of the biggest things that protein does is it burns fat. Okay. If you want an animal to look hefty and solid, they're going to need some fat on them to do so, because it's going to fill in the gaps between the muscle and make everything look bigger. And if we just keep pouring protein to them, we're going to have really lanky, really tight muscle animals. And the more protein we push to them, the harder they're going to be able to walk. So before we can really do anything with these animals or introduce large amounts of protein, we have to have them very fat first, okay? So I can't stress enough, if you want to do well at this, you got to get them fat first, and then there's other things you can do past that. The other thing that I'm going to tell you, because I can't sit up here and give every secret to feeding that I know, because the truth of it is they're not my secrets to give out. Other people have given them to me. But what I will tell you is talk to your breeders. They know a lot about these animals and how to feed them and what they're doing, okay? So that's a great way to get good information. The other thing is go to shows and pay attention to what people are doing. We have learned the most amount just by going to the state fair and sitting on a bucket and watching other people do their thing. And if you understand what they're trying to accomplish, and then you just sit there and kind of watch them do it, you'd be surprised how many little tips and tricks and things that you come up with. And the other part of it is the more that you're out there with people who are very knowledgeable in the industry, they're going to give you tips a little bit at a time. They're not necessarily going to open up their playbook and give you absolutely everything they have, but they'll give you little tips and tricks as you go. And as you do it enough, you'll just continue to get more tips and tricks and ways of feeding these animals. So I'll give you the same advice that I was given, and this was step number one: make sure you get them fat enough, okay? And then from there, there's things that you can do with protein and stuff to really try to beef them up. Go to the next one. Sources of energy: cereals and grains are high. Corn, barley, wheat, sorghum, byproducts of feeds, soy hulls. Moderate corn silage, haylage. Be careful with haylage and how much you feed just because it has a lot of water in it. And you have to understand that by weight, that water is useless. It's feed value that's most important. So not that you can't feed haylage, you just have to pay attention to what you're doing. And it's very, very high in protein, so it burns fat pretty quick. Good quality pasture, quality hay. Low quality hay is low on the energy. Straw almost has nothing. Cottonseed hulls. This is kind of an interesting topic. I don't know why goats absolutely love cottonseed hulls. It's a pretty good fiber for them. They tend to really like it. So, I mean, it's something that when you're picking out your feeds and stuff that you might want to take into consideration. There's a lot of pelleted feeds for goats that they're going to be little green pellets. My experience with those have been goats can do really well on them. They just bloat up. And if they bloat up on the breeding stocks, no big deal. But on market weathers, if you're feeding green pelleted feeds, be careful of bloat. You're probably going to have to treat them for bloat pretty consistently. Okay? Go on to the next one. Protein composed of amino acids. Bypass or escape protein increases protein efficiency. Quantity more important than quality. Okay, so protein is going to be one of the most expensive things that we can get. Here's another tip and trick. There you can buy proteins through, well, any of them. ShowRite has Blast and Purina has Fitter 35 and a lot of different proteins. They're very, very expensive. There are other cheaper ways of getting proteins. If you'll do your research and your homework, you can find some other ways to do some of that. But just, be careful and do your research on that. Usually, most expensive ingredient, excessive protein is not stored in the body. It's used very inefficiently. So pouring more protein does not necessarily equate or turn into more muscle mass. It's not like if I'm giving them 4 ounces of extra protein a day, if I bump that to 8, that they're inherently just going to get that much more massive. There is a genetic part to that. Okay, so that kind of goes into selecting our animals and having genetics that can create muscle. You can't just feed more into them all the time and make that work. You do have limitations in here, but the idea being that we want to have the best ratio that we can. Excess nitrogen is an environmental concern, and it's definitely California for them to be talking about that. Go on to the next one. Sources of protein. So soybean meal, fish meal, urea, those are all very high concentrations of protein. Moderate alfalfa, really good alfalfa hay is a very high protein content. Grass hay is lower. Poorest quality hay is going to be the least amount. On the next one. I mean, straw even has protein in it. Minerals. So this is kind of a big deal. Free choice minerals. Part of what they need to build muscle, we're going to need protein. We're also going to need the minerals that are required to break this hay and grain down and restructure it into protein. So if we're deficient in some of our minerals, we're also going to be inefficient in our conversion to protein. So free choice minerals are a pretty good idea. You do have to be very, very careful because of the copper. And if you have sheep, very much pay attention to that. If that gets in your sheep feed or your sheep get loose and they get into that, it can be deadly. But I definitely recommend minerals. On to the next one. Calcium. So limestone, bone meal, alfalfa has some, protein meals have some. Cereal grains are very bad in calcium. That's why we do have to pay attention to having a balanced ration. I really highly recommend that you use an actual goat feed because they need to have the right amount of balance between calcium and phosphorus. What's the word? Yeah, phosphorus? No, it's not phosphorus. It'll come to me in a minute. Anyway, they have to have the right ratio of that. And so like if we were just to go buy a bunch of oats and feed our goat oats, it's not going to work out real well, okay? Because it's not a balanced ration, okay? And our calcium, that's driving me nuts. It'll come in a minute. Go to the next one, please. Vitamins. Ruminants have a dietary requirement for vitamin A and D and E. K and B vitamins are manufactured in the rumen, and that is 100% true, but I still recommend giving like 2 mils of vitamin B complex at least once a month, if not every couple of weeks, so that we make sure that it's high enough. Because one, if we go to feeding a lot of grain as opposed to hay, we start to make less vitamin B, okay? No dietary requirement for C or D. They don't need vitamin C or D. Sources of vitamins, natural vitamin packs or mineral mixes or blocks. I mean, guys, they make little blocks that you can get a block holder and attach it in their pen, and they can just lick it, or you can get it in a powder form and sprinkle it on their feed. Either one is fine. Go ahead. Nutrient requirements depend on size, age, stage and level of production, climate, and environmental and body condition. You bring your goat in to your home or your barn and it weighs 30 pounds, it's going to require a lot less feed as to when it's weighing 80 to 100 pounds. So your feed's going to go up as they grow. The requirements, the stage and level of production, you're not going to run into that so much owning them 1 year, but as you have older does, as you keep them over the winter, it definitely changes. They need more feed in the winter, part of it just to create body heat, and part of it to actually be nutrition for the body. If we don't feed them enough, they're not going to gain anything because they're just converting that into staying warm. So that's what we're talking about: climate, environmental, and then body condition. Obviously, one that's really, really fat needs to be cut on feed, needs to not be feeding quite as much as it's already getting, and one that's really, really skinny is definitely going to need more. That's pretty self-explanatory. Go on to the next one. Body condition. For a bucket, can any kid that's here tell me how we check body condition from the last meeting? Does anybody here remember? Does anybody remember any of this? No? Okay, then I'll explain it again. You do. You want to tell me a little bit about it? You don't even have to be perfect. How do we use our hand to check body condition? Do you remember?
Like the fat?
Yeah, we check the fat. There's your bucket. Okay, so we have everything that we need to check the condition of our animal on our arm. So we rate it on a scale of 1 to 5. I think you can go up one more scale. I'm just going to show you where it is. Okay, so here's an animal of body condition, right? There's a 1. That 1 doesn't look really good. Can you see that at all? Yeah, it's really sunken in. You see that big hole inside, and then you can see its ribs pretty bad. So if we had a 1, if we take our hand and run it across our knuckles, that's what a emaciated goat that's not ate enough or is very sick is going to feel like. Just if we rub across their rib or across their spine, that's what it's going to feel like. That's a 1, right? A 2, if we take the front of our flat part of our hand here and rub against that, that's going to be a 2. Okay, we can still feel the ribs. We can tell that there's a gap in there, and it's definitely an indented gap. A 3, which is kind of where 3 to 4 is where we typically want to try to have these animals. A 3, if we, feel this end of it, that's going to be more like a 3, okay? And then a 4 is going to be like touching the top of the hand. We can still kind of feel our bone, but we kind of have to dig at it to know that it's there, okay? That will be more like a 4. And so what we're looking for is a 3 to 4, and we can use our hand to determine that. A 5, like a really fat one, is going to be like the top of your arm. If you can't feel any bone, it just feels solid and squishy. Go on to the next one. Body condition, here's another way to test by basically flipping them upside down and checking the fat that's underneath the backside of their legs. These animals are normally going to put fat on in the chest and then up in here first. Then it's going to go to their back, and then it's going to come to here, right behind their front joint. This right here is the hardest fat to get rid of. Okay, so that's the place we want to check. We can flip them upside down and we can check their fat content. I've actually never done this, so you have to use the pictures to kind of explain it, to, be able to tell. Go on to the next one. this is basically just saying through the life cycle of your animals, what their fat content should be. So late gestation is where we want them to have the most, the most fat cover right before they kid out, and then that fat should be burning down and converted into milk during early lactation and late lactation. Go on to the next one. Supplemental pasture or supplement pasture is needed. Like I said, we're showing animals, we're not doing it for meat production, so most of us are not gonna kick these out to pasture and just let them roll. We're gonna feed them with grain. Go on to the next one. This is just talking about feed troughs and making sure that there's enough that all the animals can get to them. But again, I highly recommend individual pens so that we can control and see what's going on with these animals. This is going into feed rations and calculating it. If you want to get really into this, there's some websites that you can use to do your own feed ration. I highly recommend using a pre-mixed feed. Go on to the next one. Manufacturers of feed. This is just them talking about pre-mixed feeds. Pre-mixed feeds are going to be more expensive. Somebody else is doing all that work for you. But if you're only feeding a couple animals, it's realistically not going to save you that much money and try to mix your own feed. Go on to the next one. Balanced rations. So this is where we were talking about having the right ratios. If you go into doing a lot of feed additives, if you start trying to add lots of fats and proteins and stuff like that, you do need to be careful of the ramifications of that. Because if you get it the balance way off, like fat, if you add fat too fast or too hard, they'll get the scours on you, okay? Like really fast. And that's everything that you're trying to do to gain, you're gonna lose when they get the scour. Next one. Rules of thumb, 3 to 4 pounds of grass hay. I'd be fine with breeding stock, but not on market. That's talking about late gestation. Feed poor quality hay prior to and after weaning, that helps them dry up. Absolutely not relevant to you guys. They're talking about pregnancy. Again, we're typically dealing with animals that are less than a year old, so we're trying to get them to gain everything we can get them to gain. Go on to the next one. Plenty of water, warm water in the winter. Think about 2 weeks. That's not gonna matter for you guys. Keep going. Keep going, lactation. Feed, we typically deal with that by weight. A food scale is a good thing to have in the barn, just so that you have, I've got kids and they go out and feed and you're like, how much did you give them? I gave them 2 pounds. Are you sure you gave them 2 pounds? So we went out, we used Folgers cups or Folgers things, and I put them on a food scale, wrote a line on them what 1 pound is and what 2 pounds is, so that they really know what they're actually feeding. And every feed's not the same. Some are lighter or heavier than others, so you want to pay attention to that. Feeding grains or whatever, they're talking about splitting feedings. It's important that these things, you get as much grain through them as you possibly can. This time of year, we feed twice a day. When it gets into the summer and the kids are at home, a lot of times they can go to feeding 3 times a day. So we'll feed early in the morning, we'll feed like a midday snack, and then we'll feed late at night. Idea being we want the animals to always be cleaning up and consuming as much as possible. Go ahead. Is that it? That's the end of it. So, for another bucket,